Welcome to Inktorical. I'm Casey. Tonight's story isn't for the faint of heart. It's a dark piece of history that's best heard in the dark. Today, we are looking at a story that feels like it was ripped straight out of a script. But unfortunately, it is entirely real. It's a story about obsession, manipulation, and the kind of suburban secret that proves you really don't know what's going on behind closed doors. We're going to talk about Jennifer, a 48-year-old woman living in Texas, who, on the surface, seemed to be living an average life. She'd been married for 15 years, but behind that quiet exterior, things were not going well. She felt stuck, unhappy, and dissatisfied with the path her life had taken. It was 2020, during a time when many of us were spending a lot of time looking at our screens, feeling disconnected. Jennifer was at home when she got a notification on LinkedIn. It was a message from a man named Darren. Now, Darren wasn't a stranger. They had actually dated way back in their high school and college years. They hadn't spoken in over 30 years. But there's something about reconnecting with someone from your past that can feel like a bridge back to a version of yourself you might miss. Darren was living up in Tennessee, and they started talking. At first, it was probably just catching up, but very quickly, the conversation shifted. They both started opening up about how unhappy they were with their current lives. It's that classic scenario where two people find a common language in their misery, and that creates a bond that feels much stronger than it actually is. They started texting, emailing, and talking on the phone for hours. It moved from a casual reconnection to an intense, long-distance emotional affair. As they got deeper into this bubble they had created, Jennifer started acting on it. She began sending him gifts and even money to help him out. It was a way of pulling him closer, building a connection that felt tangible despite the distance. But as the relationship intensified, the reality of Jennifer's situation, her marriage, started to feel like an obstacle. She didn't want to go through the messy, public, and expensive process of a divorce. Instead, she decided on a much darker path. She wanted her husband gone, and she wanted the life insurance money that came with his passing, which amounted to over $600,000. But here is where the manipulation really begins. Jennifer wasn't the type to handle this herself. She decided she was going to convince Darren to do it for her. She started a slow, calculated campaign of psychological manipulation. She told Darren that her husband was abusive. Now, imagine being on the other end of that. Darren is sitting in Tennessee, feeling like a knight in shining armor, believing he is saving a woman he cares about from a dangerous situation. Jennifer went even further. She started pretending to be her husband, sending Darren messages that sounded like they came from the man himself, admitting that he knew about the affair and was planning to punish Jennifer for it. She took it to a disturbing level of detail. She looked up stock photos of various injuries online, even dug up old photos of herself from a car accident she'd had years earlier, sending them to Darren and claiming, "Look what he did to me." Darren, completely misled, grew increasingly angry and protective. When he suggested going to the police, Jennifer had to shut that down immediately. She played on his emotions, telling him she couldn't involve the authorities because she didn't want her daughter to find out, and she feared her husband would just get worse if he found out the police were involved. She kept him in a state of constant, panicked distress. Eventually, she wanted Darren to come to the conclusion on his own that he needed to kill her husband. She needed him to believe it was his idea, his mission. She sent emails pretending to be her husband, claiming he was planning to lure her into a hot tub and have other men attack her. It was a sick, twisted story, but to Darren, it sounded like a ticking clock. He was terrified for her. Finally, the plan was set. Darren drove all the way from Tennessee down to Texas. When he arrived, he found a vacant house right next to Jennifer S. He hid out there in the dark, wearing a mask, watching her home and waiting for the right moment. The next morning, the opportunity arrived. Jennifer and her husband left the house to walk their dog. Darren saw his chance. He ran up from behind and shot her husband. Then, in an attempt to stage the scene as a robbery gone wrong, he knocked Jennifer down, roughed her up a bit, and used duct tape on her hands. But things didn't go exactly to plan. Gunshots in a quiet neighborhood are impossible to ignore. Neighbors heard the noise and rushed out. One neighbor saw Darren standing over the body, holding the gun. Realizing he had been spotted, Darren panicked and ran back to his truck, driving all the way back to Tennessee. When the police arrived at the scene, Jennifer played the role of the victim perfectly. She told them they were just out walking their dog when a stranger in a mask jumped them. The police were immediately skeptical. A robber who shoots a husband in the head but leaves without stealing anything doesn't make a lot of sense. But at that moment, they didn't have the proof they needed. While the investigation was in its early stages, Jennifer moved forward with her plan to collect the life insurance money. While she waited for that payout, the local community, completely unaware of the truth, rallied around her. Her neighbors felt terrible for her. They started a GoFundMe, raising $60,000 to help the grieving widow. She didn't just take that money. She used it to buy plane tickets for Darren and even a big screen TV, while leaving her husband's $6,500 funeral bill completely unpaid. She even went on the local news to talk about the trauma, describing how she turned around and saw someone shooting her husband. Watching those interviews now, it's chilling. She was desperate for the money and the sympathy, not realizing that the same community that felt bad for her was also keeping a very close eye on the inconsistencies in her story. The turning point came when the police asked to look at her phone. She agreed, likely thinking she had wiped everything clean. And she had. The messages between her and Darren were gone. But she didn't understand how digital forensics worked. The metadata showed she had exchanged tens of thousands of text messages with someone in Tennessee around the time of the murder. That led them straight to Darren. When they searched his phone, they found the messages that hadn't been deleted. They found the link. They matched his truck to the one seen leaving the scene. When they were arrested, the mask finally fell off. Darren was found guilty and sentenced to 62 years in prison, and Jennifer received a life sentence. It's a stark reminder that even when you think you've hidden your tracks, the digital trail and the truth have a way of catching up to you. It changed the lives of everyone involved, leaving behind a wake of broken trust and a community that will never quite look at their neighbors the same way again.